So conversely, um, while you have this rapid growth of corporate structure and capitalism in American industry, you have somewhat of a growing dissent among some people who see inequities within capitalism. Some people see that under capitalism, some people are allowed to gain ultra wealth, and they're able to work the system to gain even more wealth. So, a philosophy of some of the people who had alternative visions was maybe to reverse some of that. Um, Competition and justifications for wealth were understood. However, some people really didn't like how corporations kind of had this ethos about them that they were all about power and money. And well, that ethos kind of exists to this day. People criticize corporations to this day for various different reasons: being power hungry, being eager, being about profit over people, being about um, satisfying stockholders as opposed to consumers, too much consumerism. A lot of people go back and forth about this. And that may be something you could ask for yourself. Corporations that you see on a daily basis, are they for good or are they awful? Okay. That's up to you to decide. So also keep in mind that while these corporations make a lot of money, they also employ thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people. So you got to kind of look at it from both angles. Okay. Otherwise, though, there were people who were upset around this era that saw these wealth inequities and they wanted to do something about it. And they preferred to use government action to do it. They wanted a consolidation of power and have the government in charge of more of that. And they saw that a lot of people became very wealthy when they purchased land or property, and then the property would evaluate higher as the market dictated. So they were making immense profits in real estate, and that's how they made money. Okay, well, the two biggest ways to make money today are in the stock market and in real estate. And most people would argue that it's real estate. If you've ever watched any of these Home and Garden Channel TV shows, Flip This House, Sell This House, or um, anything along those lines where they're doing like a remake and renovation or anything else like that, you have people who are buying property, fixing it up, and then selling it for a profit. You can make immense amount of profits by buying and selling property. The stock market, if you time things right, you could make an immense amount of wealth. Like Amazon stock today is over $2,000 a share. Imagine had you understood and seen the e-commerce trend back in the late 1990s when Amazon was trading for less than $30 a share. What if you had bought 1,000 shares or even 100 shares of Amazon back in the day? Where would you be today? How much wealth would you have? So even though you would pay taxes on it, you'd still have an immense amount of wealth. Well, there were people back then who saw that sort of a profiteering, which is not wrong, but they saw that as being manipulatable, if that's a word. Manipulatable. It can be manipulated. Um, and there were people who figured, that's really should be more community property. Somebody's land, they're making immense profits off it. We should be able to tax that and make that more community property. And that developed more of an ideology around, after you had publications of Karl Marx in the mid 1800s and others that would soon follow, especially with Henry George in the late 1870s, that talked about how properties can be manipulated, profits can be manipulated, and concentration of wealth gets highlighted in a reasonably few amount of people. So in order to do away with that, you can tax these properties higher and realize that property should be more community property and wealth can be more evenly distributed. Okay? So what you have there is the beginning of a socialist philosophy that has its roots in the American Socialist Party that began to emerge in the late 1800s. And so The philosophy of socialism is very well intended, and it's designed to decrease inequities, which is great. I think it is. It's oftentimes very hard to truly work and be distributively fair. So some folks criticize socialism a lot. Some folks say socialism leads to something more drastic, like communism under true Marxist Leninism. Okay, there are various different social philosophies that we'll discuss later on in the semester. But the idea behind socialism is to reduce inequities, and I don't think anybody should have a problem with that. In practice, it's a lot harder to understand. But the idea is you have a well-intentioned philosophy. You have more and more publications that come out. And one in particular, by Edward Bellamy, Looking Backward, was a late 1800s novel that is fictional, but it's about somebody who falls asleep in like an intense coma in the late 1800s. And they wake up in the year 2000. In the year 2000, there are no class systems. Nobody has uneven amounts of property. Various different corporate trusts are merged into a government trust, and profits in industry is distributed evenly. No class system. All government control. No class divisions. All that sounds great, right? Sounds like a socialist utopia. Okay? Obviously, in the year 2000, that didn't happen. That was completely fictional and hyperbolic in a lot of different ways. But it's symbolic of the grand vision of socialists that were born out of this era who had the intention, rather, of a noble idea that you want to erase classism. Okay? And that's noble. It's just very hard to execute in human nature. But people of this era believe that instead of social Darwinism, survival of the fittest, they believe that people in this era could be relying more upon human intelligence to control things. Okay, so it's a different philosophy of thought in that regard. But otherwise, around this time, there were people who also feared the idea of corporate monopolies. So, yeah, you may have seen that board game, Monopoly, and you may have played it. I never played it correctly. I just played whatever. I always tried to get after the electric company and the water company and try and suck everybody out. But otherwise, though, a monopoly is where basically you have one company that does one thing that everybody relies upon. And therefore, you can charge whatever you want for it because you don't have competition. So imagine, if you will, there was only one cell phone manufacturer. Okay? Apple. I have an iPhone. Okay? What if there were no Android phones? No Samsungs? No Google phones? Nothing else? All you had was an iPhone. Apple could charge you what they want. Now, some would argue that they still have a monopoly because there's only one Apple platform and iPhones are so widespread that, wow, it's hard to deal without that. Even if you have an Android platform, you're still going to run into people with iPhones or whatnot, and they charge very high prices for those. And hopefully you'll be able to pay that in installments and not dump everything off in one check. But you have economic concentration within monopolies that often lead to abuses of prices. And in this particular era, railroads, who typically own the tracks, they own the properties and real estate around the train stations, and oftentimes controlled economies in and around the towns where the train stations were located, it really had the effect of, wow, these railroads can charge whatever they want to distribute manufactured goods or people or anything else. And that was a real fear. So, what if also that company also started to struggle? They could tank the economy. So you might have economies that are now reliant upon corporations doing well, and if they don't do well, that can have a drastic effect all the way around. So there were people who were in this era mindful of wealth distribution and monopolies. Okay, so keep that in mind going forward.